Good evening. I'm Susan Kohlmann, President of the New York City Bar, and I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's program, Safeguarding the 2024 Election, the Role for Lawyers. This evening's program concerns one of the great pillars of our constitutional democracy, the right to vote, the way in which citizens in a free nation select their leaders at local, state, and national levels. But the right to vote doesn't exist in a vacuum. We have become acutely aware, especially in light of the events surrounding the 2020 election, that an independent judiciary plays a critically important role in safeguarding our democracy and the rule of law. Tonight, I think it's necessary to pause for a moment and address the independence of the guardians of our electoral process, the judiciary. Without an independent, nonpartisan, and trusted judiciary, our courts cannot protect our democratic process and assure that our citizens' electoral choices are respected by all candidates, whether winners or losers, and by the public at large. Yet we are today witnessing an unprecedented assault, not only on election officials, but also on the judges, clerks, jurors, prosecutors, and witnesses who make our justice system work. Most of them are not able to respond to or protect themselves from the increasing wave of character attacks and threats that some politicians, including those who aspire to the highest office, have directed at them in press conferences and rallies or on mainstream and social media. Beyond the injury to fellow citizens simply doing their jobs, these assaults are often intended to call into question the legitimacy of our judiciary and, by implication, the rule of law on which our nation is founded. Sadly, this discrediting of our judiciary comes not only from defendants who wish to avoid accountability for illegal conduct, but also from some members of the bar who should know better. As officers of the court, lawyers have an ethical duty to restrain, not to echo, claims of judicial corruption or bias that they know to be false or unsubstantiated, and to restrain public attacks on court personnel, prosecutors, or jurors that they know are improper and that expose the targets to real risk of violence to themselves or their families. The judiciary was instrumental in protecting our democracy in over 60 court cases challenging the results of the 2020 election, cases overseen by judges appointed by both Republicans and Democrats. The judiciary, court personnel, and all who play a role in making our justice system work will need confidence in their independence and safety to be able to do their part in protecting this year's election as well. And that is where all of you come in. We lawyers have a special obligation to stand up for the rule of law and defend our democracy. We together must do what we can to ensure that our election this year is free and fair. And if there is one point I wish to convey this evening, it is that standing up, speaking out, and taking action in defense of the right to vote and in defense of the independence of the justice system that protects that right to vote are not partisan activities, but are part of our unique obligations as lawyers. Which brings us to the heart of today's program: what lawyers can do to safeguard the vote. And I can't think of a better group of experts to advise us on how to go about doing just that. If you wish to get actively involved, there's an Election Protection Opportunities for Lawyers page on the New York City Bar's website. The groups represented by our august panel members have similar information and resources available on their websites, so please visit them as well. And now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator for this program, She's an adjunct professor of clinical law at NYU Law School, a lecturer in law at Columbia Law School, and a CNN legal analyst, Jennifer Rodgers. Jennifer?
Thank you, Susan. Welcome, everyone. So good to have you all with us tonight. We have four phenomenal experts to help us understand the huge challenges that we face in connection with this year's election. And they're not just going to identify the problems that we face, but they're going to offer us concrete solutions for ways that we can all get involved. As lawyers, we have special skills to offer, and I think a special responsibility to answer the call to support our democracy. So each of our speakers will talk for about 15 minutes, and after all four of them have had an opportunity to speak, we'll take questions. If you would like to ask a question, you can do so in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. If you would like that question to be directed to a particular speaker, please indicate that in the question. And don't feel compelled to wait until the Q&A starts to ask your questions. You can drop them at any time. In fact, that would be great if you would do so. Also in the Q&A is some information for you. The website page that Susan mentioned, the City Bar's compilation of information about election protection, including reference to all of the organizations represented by our speakers tonight. It's one-stop shopping, a great place for you to go to find ways that you can volunteer to help. And, I'll tell you, some of these opportunities, they even tell you how long it will take, a 1 to 5 hour opportunity, for example, and they're in all sorts of different ways that you can help. So I hope that you check those out. Our first speaker tonight will be Secretary Jeh Johnson. Secretary Johnson is the former Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. He also held other distinguished government positions. He's a partner at the Paul Weiss firm and co-chair of the American Bar Association's Task Force for American Democracy. Secretary Johnson will set the table for us by talking about the current landscape. What kind of shape is our democracy in? What are the challenges that we face as we approach this year's election in November? How can we help? What's the ABA learning about all of these things? So I'll turn it over now to Secretary Jeh Johnson.
Thank you, Jen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I have become, at this stage of my career, very good at table setting. First, I want to welcome everybody to my backyard here in Montclair, New Jersey. This is not a virtual background. This is my real backyard. There's my dog down there. You can't quite see him. My dog is famous because he once photobombed me while I was doing a Face the Nations interview in this very spot in this backyard. He's learned since then. Let me give a special shout out to my law school classmate, Columbia class of '82, Susan Kohlmann, for her election to be president of the New York City Bar. Susan, thank you for your service to the New York City Bar Association. I'm very proud of you. When I took the job of Secretary of Homeland Security in 2013, I did not expect that election security would be part of my mandate. DHS, as many of you know, is counterterrorism, it's cybersecurity, it's maritime security, it's border security, it's port security, it's aviation security, it's the Secret Service, it's FEMA, and a whole bunch of other things I can't think of right now. But I never expected it would be include election security. There goes the dog. Sorry. The reality is that the way our elections work in this country at the national level, our election results dance on the head of a pin because elections are managed state by state, very often county by county, and because of the Electoral College. The results at a national level of a presidential election come down to, and will come down to this election season, 5 or 6 states and swing districts, swing counties, swing precincts in those 5 or 6 swing states. If something or someone, and I didn't say this publicly while I was in office, for obvious reasons. But if something or someone did something to somehow alter or suppress the vote in key districts, in key states, that could alter the electoral college outcome of a national election. Our election result really does dance on the head of a pin. And because of political gerrymandering, control of Congress, control of the House, control of the Senate can also depend upon key congressional districts, key precincts in key states. Most of you, I suspect, already know that. And so the security of our election infrastructure, the security of voter turnout, free and fair elections is key in our democracy. It's key to election outcomes as well. In 2016, when we all in government saw intelligence that the Russian government was seeking to interfere with our election that year, my focus was the protection of election infrastructure, the cybersecurity of our election infrastructure, the ability to somehow alter the vote through a cyber attack in these key states that I referred to earlier. And so beginning around the summer of 2016, I and the Department of Homeland Security spent a lot of time encouraging state election officials to come forward and seek our help to strengthen their cybersecurity in voting, in election reporting. This was our principal concern. And the good news there is that many states came forward. I think over 30 came forward and sought the cybersecurity assistance of the Department of Homeland Security. The 2020 election, 4 years later, was probably the most secure election in American history in the face of a lot of efforts to undermine the credibility of the election, in the face of COVID. Let's not forget that. In the face of COVID, where many people could not go to the polling place, the 2020 election was probably the most secure election in our history. That's the good news. What we did not see, frankly, in 2016 were the attacks on social media, the efforts to alter public opinion based on social media. The 2016 election, like the 2020 election, was largely from a cybersecurity standpoint, from an election infrastructure standpoint, largely secure. I'm proud of the fact that when I left office at the end of 2016, early 2017, one of the things I did was to declare election infrastructure to be critical infrastructure in this country, which triggers all sorts of priorities in terms of the security of that system. I did that over the opposition of a lot of state election officials, most notably then Secretary of State of Georgia, Brian Kemp, who is now the governor of Georgia. I'm glad I did that. The Trump administration, my successor, John Kelly, reiterated, designating that election infrastructure should be critical infrastructure. But there's a lot of work to do. There are attacks by some of our political leaders on the security and the sanctity of our election system right now as we speak. We still see this online on social media. So about a year ago, as was mentioned, when I was asked by the president of the ABA, Mary Smith, to lead this election democracy task force of the ABA, along with Judge Michael Luttig, one of my heroes, I said yes. I said yes, that I would take this on. I'm sorry, there's somebody cutting their grass across the street. Hope you all can still hear me. And since we launched this effort last August, I've been very pleased that a lot of people have come forward. They've volunteered their time and attention to the sanctity and the security of our democracy and our election. Ben Ginsberg, who you will hear from in a moment, is a member of our task force. We're doing a lot of good work to promote the security and safety of our democracy and our election. My personal interest is in taking the politics out of election redistricting and having citizen commissions create district lines as opposed to politicians, which fosters a system in which the politicians choose the voters, not the other way around. And I'm also particularly interested in having open primaries, not partisan primaries. We're having a come one, come all primary and a runoff in the general election. These are things that have been launched in certain states, in Ohio and Michigan in particular. They have undertook to have citizen commissions to write district lines. These are all steps in the right direction, but there's a lot more to do, and I'm sure the experts that are on this panel will spend a lot of time doing that. Last thing I'll say is, before I put myself on mute, is for those of you who are listening, and there are something like over 400 of you listening, if you are a member of the New York State Bar, I encourage you to become an active member of the New York City Bar Association. I've been a member of the New York City Bar Association for 40 years. I served on the ethics committee of the New York City Bar in the early 1990s. I served as chair of the Judiciary Committee of the New York City Bar from 2001 to 2004. It was one of the best volunteer assignments I ever undertook, and I served on the executive committee of the New York City Bar as well. I've made lifelong friends through the New York City Bar Association, and it's a wonderful organization doing wonderful work for the public good at the city, the state, and the national level. So I encourage all of you to please step up your own involvement in the New York City Bar, particularly when it comes to the topic we're discussing tonight, election security. So that's really all I have to say. Jen, back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Secretary Johnson. We'll be back to you, I'm sure, with some questions in a little bit. So next we will go to Ben Ginsberg. Ben is a nationally renowned Republican elections lawyer who, among many other things, is the co-founder and co-chair of Election Officials Legal Defense Network, which matches election officials who need pro bono legal representation and communications help with volunteers willing to assist. Ben's going to speak to us about the problems that he has identified that led to the creation of EOLDN and tell us about what it does and how we can get involved. Ben.
Jen, thank you very much for having me. And I do appreciate being able to address all of you. You're an incredibly important group as members of the bar in the solutions to the sort of situation that Secretary Johnson described. And the 2024 election is indeed a crucial moment for our country and our system of government. That you're here means you recognize this, and hopefully many of you want to get involved. It's important that you do so. There will be many opportunities, including a number that I'll mention, and Wendy and Nana will as well. I also recognize that this is a 501c3 organization and therefore not partisan, and that this discussion cannot be about particular candidates, although goodness knows that choice is important as well. But within that limitation, what I do want to talk about tonight is something critically important to our form of governance, and it's really on the line in this election, and that's the credibility of the institution of elections itself and the importance of members of the bar helping to fortify that situation. Charges that elections are not reliable and do not produce accurate results strike at the very heart of our form of government. That manifests itself in two specific problem areas I want to talk about and to offer for your consideration and hopefully participation organizations and actions that can make the situation better. The specific problems are, number one, the impact of these attacks on election officials, the citizens who run our elections in our local communities, who make elections work, and who are under real assault these days for just doing their jobs. And number two, we have a serious problem in this country with the fact that between 30 and 35% of our fellow citizens, according to the polls, have come to believe that our elections are not reliable. Having 30 to 35% of the country not trust election results corrodes the bedrock principle of the peaceful transfer of power on which our government rests. It's important that we take steps to redress that in the next 201 days. And no matter on which side of the partisan divide you fall, that number, 30 to 35% not believing in election results, is not sustainable. It's a recipe for unrest that's really harmful to our democracy and our communities. If citizens do not believe our leaders are accurately chosen, no one will be able to govern. We seek solutions for those two vexing problems at a time, and probably because of the extreme polarization that's gripped our country. But whatever the causes, there are two fundamentals that are true about any solutions or remediation that can be achieved in the next 201 days before the election, or will come to pass in its aftermath. Number one, this is an issue that needs to be dealt with locally. The national scene, as we've come to learn from our travels around the country, is simply too toxic. The people are too locked into positions. But what we've found through the Election Official Legal Defense Network and other work being done with elections in contentious jurisdictions is that at the local level, there's a pride in community and a desire for peace and prosperity that can really help find solutions to that, and where people being willing to reach across the partisan divide to find solutions is much greater. In that same vein, a second thing that is fundamental that is true is that you need to be bipartisan on big structural changes, that the ones that Secretary Johnson mentioned and a host of others. Winning elections is, to be sure, a partisan exercise, but we are a very divided country, with all of us tending to be in our own echo chambers that enable us to think we're always right. But no matter how right you feel, just look at the polls. We are a very evenly divided country right now. Neither side can understand why the other side's candidate is doing so well, which means that if we want to reduce the 30 to 35% number or make big improvements to the ways we vote and the structures of our government, we need for all of us to break out of our echo chambers and start talking and listening to people with whom we don't agree. For these issues, I'm incredibly fortunate to work with Bob Bauer, counsel to both President Obama and President Biden. We co-chair two organizations about which I want to tell you that do try and deal with these problems and these fundamentals. Bob and I continue to disagree about many policy and political issues, but one thing we do agree on is that one side forcing a solution basic to the democracy on the other will not work, has not worked, and will only divide us more. So let me talk about what you can do to help with this situation. First, regarding the attacks on election officials, they are particularly pernicious to the way we put on our elections and to what people feel about elections. Bob and I co-chaired the Presidential Commission on Election Administration appointed by President Obama in 2013 and 14. We took a hard look at elections and made a series of recommendations and best practices. But more than anything, we got to know and to form a real appreciation for election officials. And while the attacks on the accuracy and credibility that have started in the past few years, as unprecedented as they are false, has for us, from our different points of view, very worried about the countries and our communities, And that's a key thing for all of you as members of the bar to try and work and correct. The vehicle of which Bob and I co-chair is called the Election Officials Legal Defense Network. And we formed it in the wake of the 2020 elections as the attacks came on election officials for just doing their very crucial jobs. As we learned of election officials needing help beyond what was being provided by their government attorneys, we realized how we could help and formed EOLDN through the Center for Election Innovation and Research and with its executive director, David Becker. You've read about what election officials are going through, the personal threats, the constant harassment and questioning of their integrity, and legal assaults. With the great work of David and his team, we've spent the last 2 years recruiting lawyers to provide election officials with pro bono representation in their times of need. We want the existence of EOLDN to send a clear message to election officials that we have their back, especially when their own county and state attorneys can't or won't zealously represent them. We've been able to help in many instances. We've helped Republican officials, we've helped Democratic officials, we've worked in urban, suburban, and ex-urban areas. Truth is, we wish there was no need for EOLDN, but even in this past off year, there's been a steady stream of instances where local and state election officials needed legal help. We work with firms of all sizes, sole practitioners to national firms who have made EOLDN part of their pro bono programs. We believe that our most successful representations are often the ones where a lawyer showing up on behalf of an election official has made the situation go away with a strong message. We really don't know what the demand will be for the rest of 2024, but the indications are it'll be significant. We know we need to be prepared. So we'd really appreciate your signing up to help us with the Election Officials Legal Defense Network. There's a sign-up sheet available at eoldn.org, and we really appreciate what you can do to be there, to be prepared for what could be an onslaught against election officials who really deserve our support. Now, Bob and I are dedicated to EOLDN and the concept, but we also came to realize that what EOLDN was working with was a symptom and not the underlying disease. That 30% of the voters who don't believe elections are reliable has not declined since January of 2021. That's significant given all the efforts to fight disinformation that has taken place. Most of those efforts have been on a national level rather than a local level. And if you need evidence of this phenomenon, just think back about the consistent reporting by virtually all the media we all consume that's talked about how there is no evidence of these fraud in elections allegations. But yet all those newspaper articles, all the programs haven't really worked. And so we still got this huge problem with the number of people who don't believe in the reliability of elections. So our second nonprofit operates in 6 of the country's most contentious election jurisdictions. It's called the Pillars of the Community, and it's aimed squarely at building more community support for and knowledge about election officials and the reliability of the actual election systems they run. Our goal is to recruit community leaders in these jurisdictions from across the political spectrum, from the bar, from the faith community, from veterans, business, labor, education, civic organizations, community leaders who are voices within their community. We're asking them to meet with election officials to really kick the tires of the election system, ask all the questions they have about how elections work, about each of the phases of the election system, to learn about the safeguards that do protect the reliability of the vote, and then to be willing to publicly validate the election systems and ultimately the results of the election. Not who won, but that the process for determining the winners is reliable. This needs to be public, and it probably needs to be both before and after the election. So members of the bar in Maricopa County, Arizona, around Atlanta, Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Nevada, in Houston, Texas, we're interested in including you and getting your recommendations on people for this program. With that, let me turn it back to Jen, and thank you for your attention to this crucial subject. And please do get involved, either through organizations specifically or by becoming poll workers and helping election officials, or actually going out to the states to help ensure that our elections are accurate and reliable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. Wow, 201 days till the election. I wasn't aware of that exact number that is coming up. So some questions are coming into the Q&A. Please keep them coming. There's some great questions there, but let's get even more. Our next panelist, Wendy Weiser, has lost her voice a little bit. So we're very grateful that even with that, she is still joining us. And we ask your indulgence if she's a little hard to hear, but we're so grateful that she is here. Wendy Weiser is the director of the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center. The Brennan Center, as I'm sure you all know, does so much work in important areas related to elections, things like voter protection issues like voter roll purges, combating disinformation, protecting election officials as well. So Wendy is going to help us further understand what's going on and how you can help amplify the work that the Brennan Center is doing through volunteering. Wendy, you're
Thank you
up.
so much, and I'm so sorry that my voice is going further. Excuse me. I don't know if anyone can hear me anymore. My voice keeps going, getting worse. The Brennan Center is a think tank and public interest law center that works to strengthen, reform, and defend our systems of democracy and justice, including our election system, which is under attack. As you've heard, I hope I can speak for my whole allotted time. I have very little voice left. I want to start by underscoring what has already been said, that perhaps the greatest threat that we are facing right now to our election system is the attack on the credibility of that system, the widespread disinformation that is spreading about our elections, that disinformation that is fueled by hostile foreign actors, by AI tools, and by even domestic activists trying to sow distrust in the election. And I wanted to underscore lawyers' special role and responsibility to stand up for the rule of law, for our democracy, and for our election system and its credibility. So I do want to underscore what has already been said. You should be standing up for election officials, for judges, and against the rampant disinformation that is only going to accelerate as the election nears. And even more than your role as lawyers and litigators, your role as community leaders speaking for the rule of law and for the credibility of the system is going to be especially necessary and valued. And I hope you hear me. I've been asked to especially focus on what are some of the legal opportunities, and I will then turn back to non-legal opportunities for lawyers to get involved. But I do want to start by saying that the Brennan Center works to keep elections and voting out of the courts, to strengthen our election system so we don't end up in legal disputes. But we do, of course, litigate when necessary, and when we do so, we do so with the assistance of pro bono lawyers and like many of you here. I wanted to talk a little bit about what the legal landscape is around voting and elections this year, so you can get a sense of what the opportunities are and where the litigation is going, and where in some cases it's actually causing more confusion and disinformation rather than helping to secure and strengthen voting rights in elections. And I hope you can hear me. Can folks still hear me with my waning voice? Can you hear me? Thank you.
Yes, Wendy. You should get
Jeez.
extra CLE credit for this.
I'm so sorry about this. It's been getting progressively worse over the course of the last hour. So it was not like this an hour ago. So first, I wanted to talk about voting rights lawsuits. I know a lot of lawyers in the private bar are very interested in fighting the surge of vote suppression that we've seen over the last couple of years and really over the last decade here in America. And the Brennan Center, we've been tracking this new movement over the last decade to pass legislation to put in place other measures to make it harder for eligible citizens to vote. Over the last decade, there have been more than 100 or almost 100 laws passed in half the country to make it harder for eligible citizens to vote. 2/3 of those laws have been put in place over the last 4 years since the 2020 election. So this has been accelerating, but there is unfortunately not a huge amount of opportunity this year for people to get involved in litigation to try to help that situation in advance of the 2024 election. And that's in part because of developments in the courts over the last decade. First, the rollback of the Voting Rights Act that has made it much harder to challenge any discriminatory laws and practices that are put in place. They take a lot longer. And in fact, you can't rely on what was the strongest tool to push back on discriminatory voting measures in the states, which was the pre-clearance provision under which states and localities that had a history of discrimination in voting that had to get advance approval from either the Justice Department or federal courts before putting in place new voting measures. That is no longer operative because the Supreme Court has rolled that back. Secondarily, the court has supercharged a judge-made doctrine that called the Purcell Doctrine that says that the courts are not going to be making any changes to election laws and practices, even to strike down new changes that election officials and courts are putting in place as an election approaches. So the closer we get to an election, the more likely that courts are going to be barred from being able to put in place any remedy, even an obviously discriminatory or otherwise unlawful measure. So there's going to be very little opportunity in the remainder of this year to engage in new litigation to push back on this ongoing effort to make it harder to vote. That said, there will be opportunities in the litigation that is already underway to try to protect what remains of the landmark Federal Voting Rights Act, which has been subject to many novel legal attacks, not just the ones that have previously weakened it, but in cases that are making their ways through the courts. In the 11th Circuit, we just filed briefs just yesterday because there's a challenge that says that no private parties can file lawsuits to enforce voting rights under the Voting Rights Act, and also challenging the constitutionality of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is the nationwide protection against discrimination in voting. It has a special results test that is operated to protect against discriminatory voting changes since this pre-clearance protection has been made inoperative. So these are one case, but all in circuits all across the country, there were novel attacks to try to weaken or even overturn the Federal Voting Rights Act. And the bar, including the New York City bar, has a role to play to stand up for the legality and strength and importance of this landmark federal law, which many Americans think of as akin to a constitutional protection for their voting rights. There's also opportunities that people will have to engage in what is now a interesting new trend and a disturbing trend that has ballooned since the 2020 election of people who are trying to either roll back voting rights or make it harder for election administrators to administer elections, or even people who are trying to make it easier to sow doubt in elections and overturn election results, to affirmatively use the courts to try to help them in that endeavor. And so we've seen now a surge in lawsuits trying to make it harder to vote via litigation. For example, recently challenges in Pennsylvania trying to overturn legislative and administrative efforts to put in place automatic voter registration or drop boxes, or efforts in Mississippi to impact how absentee ballots are counted. We are seeing lawsuits seeking to overturn the authority of election officials to set regulations to help make elections work in their jurisdictions. Most recently in Arizona, there's a challenge to the entire election manual and the entire authority of the Secretary of State to impose all of these long-standing procedures for how elections are run in the state. There are lawsuits trying to force election officials to knock voters off the roll in large-scale ways and to try to take over the role of maintaining election rules, and lawsuits otherwise trying to disrupt election administration. And I want to say there's a real, in Maryland, for example, there's an actual lawsuit that's trying to enjoin election officials from certifying any election until all of these supposed weaknesses in the election administration system are adjudicated. These are actual, in many cases, press releases via litigation, an abuse of the court system. But in some cases, they can do actual damage to election rules and practices. They can also divert precious resources of election administrators away from protecting the security and sanctity of our elections towards defending against this misinformation and these frivolous suits. And the states and voter protection organizations do need support to push back against this effort. There is also a real risk and growth of political violence efforts to, we've heard about the attacks on election officials, judges. There's been people mobilizing outside of drop boxes at vote count centers, and there's a real concern that we're going to see a real growth of that in the lead up to the election, perhaps just efforts to disrupt the election, efforts to intimidate election officials and voters. That is going to need legal support. And then, of course, there are threatened efforts to try to thwart certification or overturn election results. That is going to be mainly in the hands of the campaigns and the candidates, but the legal community has a role to play there in standing up for basic democratic and constitutional values. And we at the Brennan Center would value pro bono support from all of you, as would other members of the voting rights and election integrity bar. I would want to point out that litigation, though, is not the main way where lawyers should get involved in upholding the integrity of the system. I want to put a plug for what we talked about before, standing up against against disinformation, standing up against the attacks on election officials and others, but also volunteering to serve as a poll worker, giving your employees time off to vote, to volunteer to serve as a poll worker, helping with, you can, as a volunteer election administrator, helping protect the vote, mobilize voters, and of course, advocating for stronger and better laws to ensure the integrity and sanctity of our election system. And I do want to say that while Congress and at the national level, as Ben noted, is very polarized and toxic, out in the country, Americans are much less polarized. People actually support common sense reforms that would take a lot of the shenanigans and politics out of the election system. Like we hear bans on partisan gerrymandering, efforts to thwart election subversion, automatic voter registration, and other common sense baseline rules to keep the manipulation of election rules out of our year-to-year election process. And so we do hope you will stand up for those common sense rules so that we're not involved in these kinds of lawsuits year after year, but rather elections are about the elections themselves and the issues facing Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Wow, you are a champion for gutting through that 15 minutes. And I have to say, I'm not sure, well, I shouldn't speak yet because we still have Anna, but we are running ahead of time, which I feel like never happens. We're going to have so much great time for Q&A. This is fantastic. So batting cleanup tonight is Anna Chu. Anna is the executive director of We the Action. They recruit tens of thousands of volunteer lawyers to work with nonprofits on democracy-related issues all across the country, well, in key states in particular. And there is something for everyone here. So even if you think your legal skills are not suited particularly for what you think is election-focused work, I promise you, go to the website. There is something there. They have a newsletter you can sign up for. They will send you an email with opportunities. And so it's a terrific group. Anna's going to tell us all about what they're doing, how important it is, and how you can get involved. Anna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for inviting me to speak today. I'm excited to be here with you all. My name is Anna Chu, and I'm the Executive Director of We the Action. We the Action is a community of more than 45,000 volunteer lawyers who have donated over $125 million worth of pro bono legal services to nonprofits across the country. So through our state-of-the-art platform at wetheaction.org, we make it easy for lawyers to find opportunities to donate your specialized skills and experience to nonprofit organizations working on a wide range of issues. So from protecting voting rights to advocating for racial justice to defending immigrant communities and much, much more. Today, I am proud to share with you more information about our Voter Vanguard effort to provide pro bono opportunities for lawyers to strengthen and protect our democracy and right to vote during the 2024 election cycle. So all voters should have an equal opportunity to vote and to have that vote count. But as you've heard from my co-panelists today, the right to vote has been under threat. In 14 states, at least 17 new voter suppression laws will be in effect for the 2024 general election. Misinformation about voting is also rampant, and it confuses, obstructs, or intimidates voters. This all means that there is an ever-constant need to provide Americans with information and assistance at all stages of voting. And as Ben mentioned, we've also seen unprecedented attacks on election officials and attempts to undermine faith in American democracy. In a recent survey of local election officials, 45% reported fearing for the safety of their colleagues. Now, all these challenges are a call to action. As Jennifer mentioned before, lawyers have the power to protect and strengthen our democracy. And through our Voter Vanguard effort, We the Action will help thousands of lawyers take action. This year, we're making our biggest commitment yet. We are aiming to donate 150,000 hours worth of legal services to protect democracy. And I hope that you will all help us in reaching this goal. Now, We the Action volunteers will have the opportunity to do things such as identify and address election administration problems, combat voter purges, educate voters about their rights, and protect the vote at polling locations and call centers across the country. So we work with nearly every single national democracy and voting rights organization you can think of, including both Election Officials Legal Defense Network and Brennan Center, who are both on the call today, as well as the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. We also have a long-standing partnership with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law to mobilize lawyers to staff the 866-R-VOTE hotline. This is the largest nonpartisan voter protection effort in the country. In addition to our national partnerships, We the Action is also diving deep to support organizations working on the front lines in key states. That includes Arizona, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Wisconsin. Now, this is not an exclusive list of where you can find pro bono opportunities related to democracy and voting rights. In fact, in 2022, the past election, we were in 24 states. So if you can sign up today for Voter Vanguard, you will have access to a wide array of democracy-related pro bono projects. So anything from in-state election protection work to rapid response efforts and much more. And some of the current opportunities include observing the certification process at the county level across the state of Ohio, monitoring local election board meetings in Nevada, and partnering with the Florida Election Protection Coalition to provide legal rapid response capacity on the ground while ensuring polling locations are accessible to voters. And of course, I want to actually highlight a particular project today. Ben described, his work today with the Election Officials Legal Defense Network. We are also partnering with him to support that, and you can sign up through our website, and I'll drop the link afterwards. So as I said, the Voter Vanguard campaign will offer lawyers a wide range of opportunities that are both remote, that are in person, some that are 1 to 5 hours, some that are 11 to 20. There's something for everyone. We are also offering lawyers an opportunity to participate in monthly engagement, education, and training events alongside experts and advocates in the field of democracy and voting rights. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and you can sign up to be part of the Voter Vanguard effort at wetheaction.org, and I'll provide the links.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. Okay, well, we have plenty of time for questions, and there are a good number of questions on the Q&A, but keep them coming. We have a lot of questions for Ben. Some of them are kind of what I would call nuts and bolts type questions about, how you can sign up to work for EOLDN. Are there opportunities for retired lawyers? Is there training provided? How you actually go about it, that sort of thing. So Ben, do you want to come back on and give us a little bit more detail about how to get that process going and what it entails?
Sure. Thank you all for those great questions. We're very interested in having you sign up. Again, the process begins by your signing up at EOLDN.org. And the questions about the training needed are good ones. What we've found in virtually all of the cases we've had is that they don't require an expertise in election law. It is a matter of your ability to talk with clients in need who are facing a threat for the government and or in private litigation, and giving them advice how to handle that situation. If in fact there is a matter in which we refer you to the election official that does require either election law expertise or another kind of expertise, we are happy to provide that. But again, it is the basic skills of aiding clients in contentious situations that is most important.
So while I have you, could you talk also a little bit more about the Pillars of the Community project? It sounds like you don't necessarily need any specific training for that. You wouldn't be representing someone in an election-related litigation.
No.
Can you talk a little bit more about who you're looking for to do that kind of work and what that entails and how you would sign up for that?
Sure. Well, we're going into those jurisdictions that I mentioned. and we're looking for leaders in the community. Members of the bar certainly fit into that description. And we're looking for those of you who have sort of broad networks within the community so that you can learn about the election system and provide reassurance to the public that the systems work. Look, lawyers are good to have in this group, leaders of the bar in those local communities, because you do have constituencies that in a time of crisis can play a real role in bringing reassurance to citizens and not having situations about elections get out of hand. The way to sign up is send me an email, if you could, bginsbe@gmail.com. And I'll send that on to the people we have helping us in each of the local communities and where we'll be making additional visits in the coming months.
Does the pillars of the community, is that part of the EOLDN website, or is there?
No, they're separate. The pillars of the community is, for the time being, not a public-facing organization, although we'll have a preliminary website up soon. We are conscious of the fact that the people who we will ask to be pillars, and that'll be between 20 and 30 in each of those communities, are very busy people, and this is a educational process, and then the public-facing part much closer to the election.
Great. Okay, well, we have some questions next, I think, for Wendy. If you have any voice left, we'll see if you can stick with us for a little bit. Some of the folks have asked about the status of mail-in ballots and vote-by-mail programs across the U.S. as we approach the election.
So I'm happy to answer that. I also wanted to answer something I inadvertently dismissed, but the mail ballot and vote by mail, we've seen expansion of availability by and large of vote by mail across the country since the pandemic. Americans had an experience with it, liked it, and it expanded in most places. At the same time, mail balloting has also been the subject of a lot of partisan disputes and targeted legislation seeking to roll back voting rights, sometimes in places where to roll back voter access for longstanding practices that have worked for decades and decades. So it is still something that is highly contentious and being litigated across the country. That said, we are not in a pandemic, and so the other voting options are also going to carry more weight than they did in 2020. I wanted to flag, somebody asked a question about the disbarment actions and the Rule 11 actions against a lot of the lawyers, especially in the lead up to, or in the lead up to and immediately after 2020, that were using misinformation in the courts, and whether or not that is having an impact. And I wanted to say it is my observation that it is having a deterrent impact, that we are seeing some impact and less we're seeing some less crazy factual allegations being thrown out as willy-nilly as we did before, but not necessarily as much of an impact as we need. As I noted, there still are a lot of frivolous lawsuits being filed, including lawsuits based on really baseless allegations. There's a little bit more of a read of facts being offered, but they don't, in my view, meet even a Rule 11 standard. And I think this is a challenge for the legal system to actually not have the courts be used as an engine of disinformation. In many of these cases, the goal might not even be to achieve good legal outcomes, though people will take what they can get. The goal might be to use the dispute in the courts as a way of generating controversy and paving the way for other efforts to try to cast doubt in or overturn election results. And this is something that the legal system and the bar needs to stand up against. I think we need to be more aggressive in policing ethics and in stemming this. It does not speak well for lawyers how front and center lawyers were in the efforts to overturn the election. And it would speak very well for the bar to rein that in for coming future elections.
You're on mute, Jennifer.
So sorry. I was just trying to keep it so that my dog didn't disrupt the proceedings here. Is there a way, Wendy, to know which of our polling stations, locations are most in need of poll watching? Like, does Brennan keep tabs on where the biggest trouble spots are so that if we have folks who do want to volunteer to be a poll watcher and their own jurisdiction isn't a particularly problematic area, they have some guidance as to where to try to go volunteer their time?
So we will share through the City Bar resources of organizations that are actually keeping track of those priorities. Also, many election officials are keeping track of where they have poll worker shortages or where they need to have, in many places, you need to have bipartisan election observers present too. So where they, and so we're happy to share that. I think that being a poll worker and being an election observer is a very important thing to do in this election. And
Great. Great. So let's move back to Secretary Johnson. I wonder, Secretary, if you would be willing to comment on the pillars of the community effort and how it sounds to you given where you're sitting at the task force and whether folks in New York City or the Bar Association could be helpful in that program in any particular way.
So thank you for that question. I do agree with what was said earlier that lawyers have a special role in promoting and securing our democracy. People who went to law school, who wanted to become lawyers, so often have a special interest in protecting our values, protecting our democracy, becoming involved in the public interest. And I've seen with the ABA so many lawyers who wanted to come forward and simply ask, what can I do? And this is a work in progress, very definitely. We see these alarming poll numbers from Americans who say, I'm maybe our democracy is not working. I'll try something else. Democracy is it's like oxygen. You breathe it every day, but if somebody tried to take it away from you, you'd become desperate to get it back. It's like water, same thing. It's like freedom. If somebody tried to take away your freedom, you'd be desperate to get it back. Same thing with democracy. And so I think there needs to be an emphasis on civics, on education, at even the high school level, about the importance of our democracy, about the way our democracy is supposed to work right now. When I was Secretary of DHS, I used to naturalize new citizens. Become a naturalized citizen, you've got to study. You've got to take a test. I've actually helped someone become a naturalized U.S. citizen. They have to know a U.S. senator is elected every 6 years. There are 2 senators per state. There are 435 House members. They understand a naturalized American citizen from Ghana, from India, from Nigeria, from Sierra Leone, understands separation of powers well beyond what most Americans, everyday Americans, understand. And my view is, if more of us could appreciate and understand the virtues of the democracy we have, and that we have to keep, we have to work to keep, they would appreciate the importance of voting and the importance of the protection of the right to vote. I guess that's what I have to say, Jen.
Great. One more question for you. This was the first question that came in, actually. This viewer wonders if there are any comments pro or con about the effort in New York State to merge the presidential primary and the local downstate primary dates. Any thoughts about that, like making those make more sense?
Well, that's a good question, and it would certainly promote voter participation and turnout in the downstate local elections. The pros who've been at this for a while, frankly, will say that the reasons we have special local elections on these odd days when there's no other election is so that the right people turn out to vote the right way that those who set the rules want. That kind of backfired with the election of AOC. And so in my opinion, democracy is in a good place. The more people who vote, the more voter participation for whatever result, democracy is in a good place. And so in concept, I guess, I would support that. If some New York State election law experts were on the line, they may have a different view, but that's my reaction to the question.
Great, thank you. Anna, some questions for you, also some nuts and bolts stuff. If you could speak a little bit more about who is able to participate in We the Actions projects. Do you have to be a lawyer? Do you have to be active? Can you be retired or inactive? Do you have to have malpractice insurance? Can you give us a little bit more about some of those nuts and bolts kind of issues about how to sign up and work for your projects?
Sure, of course. To be a volunteer with We the Action, you have to be an active lawyer. The bar licensing requirements differs like across our projects. Some projects allow opportunities for anyone from across the country to participate. Some require specific bar licenses. In terms of retired attorneys can join as long as you maintain an active bar license. The only thing, though, is with malpractice insurance. Some nonprofits will cover it, and it is not an issue. Some projects are not technically practice of law. They are more background research, or actually poll watching, poll monitoring does not require a legal degree. And so there are some projects that will not require malpractice insurance. And so it differs project to project. And this is something that we allow nonprofits and volunteers to work together to navigate.
Okay, great. And someone also has asked if you have to be domiciled or admitted to work in the state if you're not. So I guess that's also going to depend on the project.
Not necessarily. It depends on the projects. And I'll give you an example. The project that we had in Nevada to monitor local election board meetings, that did not require any sort of residency or licensing requirements. It was simply to monitor the meetings, and all the meetings were streamed online live.
Jen, Jen, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Point out Wendy Weiser's comment in the chat to add to my answer that consolidating election dates also increases the diversity of those who turn out to vote and reduces the racial disparity. I think that's a very good point.
Great. We also have a question specifically about opportunities to engage in addressing the problem of disinformation. Do you have projects, Anna, that are specifically geared towards that problem?
That one is, I will confess, is in development. There are several of our partners who are orchestrating live monitoring projects right now to track the information. This is really a big issue, especially in the context of AI, distributing misinformation in a quick, faster basis. And so we are working with the Lawyers Committee right now to anticipate how we can better train the election protection lawyers to anticipate in misinformation, to address and respond misinformation. But there are also some opportunities with some of our partners, such as Common Cause right now, that is setting up large networks to track disinformation that they see.
Right. So Ben, if I can get you back, there were numerous requests for you to repeat your email address, which you so generously gave to us, but not everyone had their pen handy. So we need your email address again, if you don't mind.
Certainly, bginsbe@gmail.com.
Great. And then someone asked to repeat the states that you mentioned that were part of the pillars of the community project.
Sure, it's Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Harris County, Texas, and either Michigan or Nevada as our bandwidth permits.
Got it. Okay. Well, does anyone else have any other questions or anything to add? Someone did ask, I guess, whether this is probably for you, Secretary, what you think about having the naturalization exam as part of high school graduation requirements. I guess that would get it done, at least at one point in a young person's life.
Yeah, don't get me started. Yeah, I think that high school students should be at least as educated as naturalized American citizens. You know, the reality is at some point along the way in your social studies course, you were taught these things, but you've quickly forgotten them. I know I probably was in 11th grade, but I quickly forgot them by the time I got to 12th grade.
Okay, we're getting a couple more questions here. Let's see. Oh, someone notes that there's another volunteer opportunity at the New York Democratic Lawyers Council, a volunteer voter protection group. Thank you. And then someone asks, how would you suggest approaching your company if you were in-house counsel to get buy-in that their insurance policy should cover this activity? So any suggestions from either Ben or Anna about that issue, how to approach your company about doing this work and being covered while you do?
Sure. We have found that in-house counsel who want to help are generally covered by their company's policies. And I think as always, you sort of go up you ask your supervisor at the company, and the question will ultimately be answered by the general counsel. But by and large, in-house insurance policies have seemed to cover folks.
We've come across this question a lot as well. Yes, raising it up the chain and asking to see whether the current policies can cover or there can be amendments to the current policy. I've also seen a lot of in-house team partner with the law firms that they work with and do pro bono projects together in that fashion and then get the law firm malpractice insurance to cover. I've seen that work around as well.
Great. So for Secretary Johnson, how should law firm associates approach their firm's partners to encourage them to join the Pillars of the Community and get involved in efforts like that?
Just ask. I would be very disappointed in any law firm in New York City or New York State that would frown upon such efforts. This is part of who we are as lawyers. This is part of who we are as members of the bar. And being a member of the bar, being a lawyer, having a law degree means more than just billable hours for paying clients. And with servicing our paying clients comes, in my strongly held 42-year view, a public service to your community, your city, your state, and your country. And so I guess I'll be blunt and say, if any law firm associate has a problem with certainly any big firm in New York City, come to me, come talk to me.
Very good. Well said.
Jen, putting on my retired law firm partner's hat, your firm probably has a pro bono coordinator, someone who is there to basically handle the requests that come in. And many firms have pro bono committees that you can ask, and they definitely want to be able to find good opportunities for their lawyers to work on.
Yeah. I've spoken to a lot of pro bono coordinators from a lot of different big firms. The overwhelming majority tell me that their job as a committee is to really help address the demands of the associates. So lift your voice up. I also want to sing praises of Secretary Johnson's firm. I had an opportunity to speak with their pro bono coordinator a couple weeks ago. Super supportive, and I feel like it was one of the strongest pro bono coordinators who are supportive of this work that I've found. So.
Great. That's great to hear. There is a question for Wendy about, one is whether the Brennan Center uses pro bono lawyers that are solo and not part of law firms. And then there's another question about, I think it's getting at the notion of frivolous lawsuits and whether there's some sort of legal task force you can volunteer for to assist in Rule 11 type motions against the frivolous lawsuits that you were talking about.
So thank you for the question. I don't know if I can speak anymore. There's fewer litigate. I can't. All right. I have nothing left. Sorry.
Oops, maybe Wendy can type in the Q&A instead. She's her voice has left us. Well, I think it lasted long enough. We really appreciate your efforts. Let's see. Someone has asked, someone who lives in North Charleston, South Carolina, says that they would like to know about volunteer opportunities there. Is there a way to search in maybe Anna, in your organization, is there a way to search for specific areas if you want to look for your hometown?
Yes, the platform does allow folks to filter by state, by subject matter, as well. And so you can filter by either your residency, bar association requirement, or bar licensing requirements. So there's a variety of ways to do it. I don't recall South Carolina right now, but I will say that the opportunities pick up as we progress in the summer. So if you may not see it now, come back, check again, or sign up, and you'll get the email, and you'll get a state-specific email if you sign up for a specific state too.
Oh, great. That's really handy. And then someone has asked for a sum up of volunteer opportunities for a layperson, for non-lawyers. What, generally speaking, is there for non-lawyers to do?
I'm going to speak for Wendy. She flagged this earlier in the chat, and it's good clarification. Poll watching and poll workers, the requirements do vary state by state. But for the most part, you don't necessarily need to be a lawyer to do it. There are different specific requirements out there, but I think that's one potential opportunity for lay folks to get involved.
Right. Well, let's see. Someone said, how do you find out which specific areas in particular states need the most attention? There goes my dog again. I'm going to mute, see if anyone wants to answer that one.
I don't want to commandeer everything. So I will say that we are hosting monthly events with partners working on the ground. And so one of the purposes of hosting monthly events is to give folks a lay of the land and to allow folks to hear from experts as to what they're seeing in the various states, so that we can direct folks and help organize and mobilize as effectively as possible. So sign in, it changes by the week sometimes.
I think there are a number of sources. I mean, number one, if you're not barred in a state and can't take advantage of these pro bono legal opportunities, you can certainly get involved with your local elections office. They're looking for poll watchers, they're looking for poll workers, and there are great opportunities to get involved to bolster the system itself. I think if you want to know which are the hottest areas within a state, then probably the political parties are actually the best source of that information. They will have their target lists where they're particularly eager to be able to have people in the polls. And so the other volunteer opportunity is the one through the political parties themselves, not working for the election administrators, but working as observers for whichever political party you prefer.
Right. Well, we are out of questions. Does anyone have any last thoughts? You can have about a minute each, I guess, if you wish to sum up and make our last pitch to these folks willing to give their time.
I do, Jen. Since last summer, when I've been involved in this overall project of securing our democracy, securing our elections, I've been really, really impressed and inspired by the number of lawyers in particular who have come forward to offer their help, offer their time and their energy to this effort. It's difficult to try to harness it all, and I'm sure Ben has experienced the same thing. So I encourage everybody who took the time to participate in this program, don't let your involvement end here tonight. Stay involved. Let's, it's our democracy if we can keep it. So stay involved and find ways to volunteer and do good work.
Great.
I certainly agree with that wholeheartedly. It is really important in these contentious times for members of the bar to stick up for the institution of elections, whether that's any of the pro bono opportunities you've heard tonight or getting involved directly. But if things get contentious around election time, it's really important to have people who understand the system and are willing to validate the system itself, if not the exact results. And so in the name of the rule of law, it is important for lawyers and really everybody to get involved in this process.
Right, Anna?
Jennifer, I'm going to blatantly steal a line from former Attorney General Eric Holder, who spoke at our summit back in October. I'm not going to be as inspiring as him, but I'm going to say what he told the audience. The moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, but it only does so if we pull it. And lawyers have a special responsibility in this role. And so I hope that everybody can volunteer and do their part and do their efforts.
Great, thank you. I'm going to assume Wendy's going to take a pass. Her voice has left us for good, but she would certainly, I think, encourage us all as well to get involved and to watch the Brennan Center's terrific work in this area and to do what we can. So I wanted to thank everyone for coming tonight on behalf of the City Bar Association. We appreciate your attendance. Please check out the City Bar's webpage. It includes the websites of all of these fantastic organizations, as well as other opportunities to get involved to safeguard the elections. And please join me in thanking our 4 phenomenal speakers who are so inspiring, have got us all motivated. I know we're all going to be looking for as many opportunities as we can handle to do our part this year in advance of November's election. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. Thanks everyone in the audience for coming. And I hope to see all of you again.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night, everyone.